Now, do we have our speaker online? She can come on. Hi, this is the second Fabiola. We have Fabiola back here in our room, and she goes by Fabby. And this
Oh
is
wow,
Fabiola.
hi.
This is our speaker. And please, Fabiola, if I butcher your name, please tell me how to pronounce it. Is it Baeza-Tarin?
Yes, that's fine.
Good enough?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And she's coming to us from Florida tonight. We're going to explore grassland bird conservation across native and human altered landscape. Have you been to Florida lately? Do they do they have any human altered landscape there? Well, do we have any? So whatever goes there also applies to us. And she really bridges the gap between ranching and ecology. She grew up on a cattle ranch, and she has led critical conservation efforts for grassland species in the Trans-Pecos region of Texas and Central Florida. And she is a movie star. She had a major role in the National Geographic short film, The Little Brown Bird. You've heard of people call them LBBs or LBJs. And if you watch that movie, you will be transformed. It's really a great movie. And we have a link to it on our website, or you can just Google it and find it online and watch it. So Fabiola, or Fabi, is a conservation ecologist specializing in acquisition of conservation lands and the conservations of rare and imperiled species, those that are in danger of winking out on us. We don't want that to happen because you can't get them back. She was born and raised in the border town of Ojinaga, Chihuahua, Mexico, at her family's cattle ranch. She went to high school in Presidio. She received her bachelor's degree in biology and her master's degree in range and wildlife management from Sul Ross State University in Alpine, Texas. Yay! For her master's thesis, she worked under Borderlands Research Institute to investigate overwinter habitat requirements of two grassland bird specialists that were steeply declining at the time. That's Baird sparrow and the grasshopper sparrow. And she worked on a ranch in Marfa, Texas. And Audubon has been doing some work out there as well with landowners who are working to help these two species. When she graduated, she moved to Florida, where she worked as a research assistant in the Avian Ecology Program. I think it's Archbold. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Biological Station, overseeing a population of critically endangered Florida grasshopper sparrow. It's a subspecies of the grasshopper sparrow in Florida at the DeLuca Preserve. There were only about 100 birds. She's going to tell you all this. In 2022, she served as a spokesperson for the Florida Wildlife Corridor campaign. Live Wildly Florida. I love that. A public awareness initiative promoting the protection and connection of 18 million acres of critical habitat across the state. Now she's the Director of Avian Ecology at Common Ground Ecology. She focuses again on the conservation of rare and imperiled species and their habitats. So I bring to you, and I'm so grateful for her to come on Zoom and tell us about what she's been doing and how it applies here too. So Fabiola, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Patsy, for that introduction. If you guys don't mind, I'll turn on my video real quick so the quality of the presentation is better. Here we go. I'll come back on whenever I'm done. So thanks again. And today I'll be talking about some of the conservation work I have been doing in the past 10 years or so. And throughout most of my professional career, as you heard, I have spent my time working with grassland birds and cattle ranches in Texas for my master's thesis, and now in Florida for the last 6 years or so. And I was asked to talk about these two experiences and how they differed from each other. And you'll see through this presentation that there are, in fact, very different experiences. The stuff that I did in Texas was overwintering stuff, and the stuff that I do here in Florida with the Florida Grasshopper Sparrow is breeding conservation. So One here in Texas was more of conservation through research on a landscape scale, and the other here in Florida, it's a more hands-on type of conservation where day-to-day decisions kind of impact, a bird population. However, they did have one thing in common, and I think Patsy covered it, which is both of these happened on cattle ranches. So this is where the title comes from a phrase that goes, "What's good for the bird is good for the herd." Some of you may be familiar with this phrase, but basically what this phrase means is that good management of cattle, at least when it comes to grasslands, can also be compatible for grassland bird conservation. So throughout this presentation, I hope that to really show you how cattle ranchers are promoting grassland bird conservation. So I'll start off with a little bit of my background, my personal background. Oh, hello. There we go. So I was born in a small town across the border in Ojinaga, Chihuahua, Mexico, right along the US-Mexico border. And my siblings and I grew up on my father's cattle ranch, which is in that red pin right there. It's about 30 miles shy of the border as a crow flies, and it falls right within the Chihuahuan Desert. So it's a very desertic desert landscape. You have very arid grasslands, oak canyons, shrublands, and all of the above. And we had a really fun childhood. I'll show you a couple of pictures. This is my brother and I hauling a little orphaned calf on a red little wagon. Me and my sister, my siblings and I, and my cousin. I'm the little one in the baby mule, by the way. And yeah, so that's me when I was about 12 to 13 years old. But from a very young age, we were working alongside my parents on this cattle ranch. It has been in the family for a very long time, over 200 years, actually. And it has always been a family-operated business. So we were working alongside them. And from a very young age, we learned to love and respect this land because in our eyes, this land was very generous because it provided for us and for our living. And when some of my early memories include hearing my dad talk about how whenever he had very productive year with calves, he also noticed that there were lots of birds around. And I didn't realize it then, kind of stuck with me, but I didn't realize it then that it was because of the management that he was applying on the landscape. And later I came back to do my master's at Sul Ross, and I heard other people that recognized that pattern that usually whenever birds were doing well, cattle were doing well. And it came from, the good management that they were applying. So just a little fun story to share before this presentation. So let's start with the meat of the presentation. So what is the current problem? The current problem is that in 2019, a study by Rosenberg and authors confirmed that we have lost about 2.9 billion birds since 1970, probably a lot more now. And leading the way in decline, we had grassland birds. Oops, sorry. Did I change that? Oh, I clicked something. I can no longer see my presentation. I'm sorry. Technical difficulties. Can you guys see my screen? I can't hear anything, by the way.
We can see your screen.
Okay, I'm sorry, I can't. Did that? I apologize. Stop share. Let's try that again.
Yeah, try it again. And if you don't mind, turn on your camera so we can see you.
Yeah,
Or you can't.
absolutely.
Oh, you can't. Okay, sorry, I didn't hear.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Here we are. Is that better?
Great. Yay.
Sorry about that, guys. where was I? Bird decline. We've lost approximately 2.9 billion birds since 1970. And of course, leading the way, we have grassland birds, which have lost approximately 53% of its population. And to put that into perspective, if you were to put every single grassland bird from all the species in a big container, 53% of those are gone. So some species exhibit steeper declines than others, but overall, most of the grassland birds are showing the exact same trend, which is downwards. And this problem has been attributed to the loss of grassland habitat. Come on, there we go. So grasslands in North America are now considered kind of scarce. Only 1/3 of its historical range remain. And what remains is now threatened by urbanization, agricultural intensification, which in turn leads to shrub encroachment, fragmentation, climate change, and all the above. And of course, this is really detrimental to all species that depend on this grassland ecosystem, not only birds, but everything else as well. So first, I'll talk about the grasslands in Texas. Why are they important? Well, grasslands in Texas are wintering grounds for grassland birds, as well as breeding grounds for other birds. And it's actually believed that 90% of birds that breed in the Great Plains winter in the Chihuahuan Desert, and this is also the place where we see the greatest decline. Now, up until relatively recently, research efforts were focused on breeding grounds, investigating what was causing declines on the breeding grounds, and the winter phenology still remained poorly explored. So in 2017, I began my master's at Sul Ross State University under the Borderlands Research Institute to investigate habitat requirements of these two cool guys in Marfa, Texas. So the grasshopper sparrow and the Baird sparrow both are grassland specialists, which have exhibited steep declines in the last 50 years. Both of these guys breed in the Great Plains of North America and winter in the southern United States and northern Mexico grasslands. You can see the grasshopper sparrow has a much broader range than the Baird sparrow, but both of them occupy the grasslands in Marfa during the winter. And both of these species are considered, have similar habitat associations. They are open grassland specialists that are negatively influenced by the presence of shrubs, because shrubs attracts predators such as the loggerhead shrike, which is one of their top predators. They rely on solitary foraging. They're actually often confused by mice because they would much rather walk on the ground than fly. And they rely on grass for thermal cover and for concealment for predators. And both of these guys have very specific ecological requirements. This takes me to our study area. This happened at the Mims Ranch in Marfa, Texas. The Mims Ranch is managed and owned by the Dixon Water Foundation, and it is considered a grassland priority conservation area by a study by Poole and Punjab in 2011. Back when I did this study, the property was over 10,000 acres in size, and it was composed of actually three grazing regimes. We have on our top right corner, shaded in pink, we have our continuously grazing area, which was grazed by 30 head of cattle year round. And the remaining of the property are 30 rotational grazed pastures that would be grazed intensely by 180 to 190 head of cattle, and then get a rest period of close to a year. And then rotate to the next one. They actually do have some enclosures that are non-grazing experiments, but we didn't do anything in those. So the objectives of my study for my thesis was to assess what was driving these population declines in their overwintering grounds. Also explore habitat requirements, see what each of these species were needing on their wintering grounds, and assess food availability across the two different grazing regimes, the continuously grazed regime and the rotationally grazed regime. The methods, we captured the birds using mist nets, and I actually hosted a lot of capture events where I hosted a lot of volunteers from all over the place. So maybe you've seen me in the past. And we capture them and fit them with VHF transmitters. And afterwards, we would track them via telemetry. We tracked their everyday movements in order to collect vegetation samples and soil samples to see what they were selecting for versus what they had available. Additionally, we collected microclimate data, also at bird points versus random points to see if they were choosing areas for, any specific reason. So some of the significant results that came from the study is that we found out that temperatures were in fact driving overwinter survival in grassland birds in the Chihuahuan Desert. We also found that grasshopper sparrows, they're a lot less picky. You could say they selected area with more grass cover and less bare ground. Now, Baird sparrows were selecting for a whole lot of things. They were favoring areas with more grass height and more grass cover and more other cover. This was usually composed of leaf litter, organic matter, all the above. And they were avoiding areas with salsola, which is your tumbleweed, for height, for cover, and shrub height. And also, we also found that there was a significant difference in the areas that birds were selecting for foraging in the rotational grazing regime. So now we know that food availability can dictate where the birds are found. So the management implications for this study, we need ranches that are managing land in a way that promotes favorable habitat for grassland birds. This means that ranches need to promote more tall and dense grasses that would provide thermal refuge for birds in any of the weather extremes and concealment from predators. Also, promoting less bare ground and salsola cover, and of course, less shrub cover. And we also know from this study that the implementation of a rotational grazing regime can lead to more food resources for wintering birds. So you can see that this research project was focused on guiding conservation through scientific research in the form of land management. So how do cattle ranches come into play at this? Well, we need to advise landowners to adopt a regenerative bird-friendly land management practice that preferably mimics historic grazing patterns by bison and provides a mosaic of habitats that the different species need in order to survive. Now, 95% of Texas is privately owned, so landowner collaboration is imperative in order to reach these conservation goals. And the more the merrier, because land scale integrity is a must for larger impact and to avoid the edge effects that these sparrows have. All right, so that sums up the work that I did really quickly here in Texas, and we'll pack our bags and go to Florida. So Florida, why are grasslands important? Because they're also wintering grass for grassland birds, but also here in Florida prairies, we find breeding populations of the critically endangered Florida grasshopper sparrow, which is a subspecies of the grasshopper sparrow. There's 4 subspecies described in North America, and this is the only one that is non-migratory. It stays in Florida year-round. So protecting this habitat is really, really important. Now, 7.8% of Florida is also privately owned. So once again, the collaboration of private landowners is vital when it comes to the conservation of this subspecies. All right, so in Florida, we have what we call Florida's native dry prairie. And we have a map on the left that shows the historical extent of this dry prairie. It is a grass-dominated community. Once upon a time, it was close to 3 million acres in size. And historically, it would burn every 2 to 3 years. It's very similar to grasslands in the Trans-Pecos in the way that it's very low and open, and it has very few trees, but structurally it's also very different, and you'll see why. Now, this ecosystem has become very endangered. It is believed that we've lost over 95% of this habitat due to the same reasons that I mentioned, urbanization, agriculture intensification, and all the above. And whatever remains are isolated fragments that are surrounded by working landscapes and urbanization. And this is what Florida's dry prairie looks like. Very different from the Trans-Pecos, you can see. It does have a very herbaceous component, but then also a big part of it is, our small oaks and our palmetto, which if this land is not managed in the fire return interval necessary, which is 2 to 3 years, it can get too overgrown, and then this habitat becomes no longer optimal for the Florida grasshopper sparrow. So like I said, the Florida Grasshopper Sparrow, it inhabits Florida's native dry prairie. It is a non-migratory subspecies that resides in Florida year-round. It has a pretty long breeding season from March to August, roughly 6 months. Like most grassland birds, they're ground nesters, and they eat insects and they eat seeds. Their average lifespan is from 2 to 3 years, but we do have a few outliers. One of them being a female this year that is 10 years old, which is more than respectable age. And some of the history of the Florida grasshopper sparrow. By 1998, populations were at its highest. They had been monitored since 1991. There were point counts being conducted at all the populations, and there was roughly 320 to 350 singing males in the wild. We emphasize males here because females are very hard to detect in the landscape. They usually go undetected. And we knew that these sparrows occurred in 3 properties at 6 distinct sites. And studies suggested that there was enough dispersal between these sites that this population was actually a meta population and they were not isolated. And further genetic studies suggested that there was little range-wide genetic structure, which saw the potential for a demographic and genetic rescue. So here is a population trend of the Florida grasshopper sparrow since the 1990s. We can see again in the early 1990s that these populations are at their highest. But starting late 1990s to early 2000s, we can see that all of them start to plummet. And by 2012, the population trend of the sparrow was very obvious that all populations were declining. And at this point, the focus was shifted from monitoring these populations to maximizing the productivity to prevent extirpation from the landscape. So how do cattle ranches come into play for the conservation of the sparrow? So in 2014, a new population of Florida grasshopper sparrow was discovered in Cattle Ranch in Osceola County. On the map on the left, that is the property that is shown in light yellow. FWC, which is the state, began monitoring this population until it was handed off to Archbold in 2017. That's when I came into play. And during this time, there were 4 monitored populations only. 3 occurred in public lands, which are the ones in purple, orange, and blue, and only 1 in a privately owned cattle. So it was here that we figured out that sparrows were able to inhabit areas other than native dry prairie, which was believed to be impossible before. And they were actually occupying areas that had been modified in order for cattle to forage. So this is the habitat they were found. I showed you a picture earlier of dry prairie, and that's what we have on our right, the picture on our right. But in agricultural terms, whenever you have an improved pasture, which is the picture on the bottom left corner, this is a pasture that was converted to a Bahia grass monoculture. So it was improved for cattle forage. Now, whenever a landowner doesn't keep up with the management of this improved pasture, now native grasses kind of infiltrate in and you get, something in the middle, which is called a semi-improved pasture. And we now knew that sparrows were occupying these 3 gradients of habitat between improved pasture and native dry prairie. So after the ranch population was discovered, the captive rearing and release program was started, and the ranch population actually contributed to more than half of the birds collected. It was established in 2016. We collected birds from the wild to put in a captive populations. It started off with 5 installations for housing sparrows. 2 of them were for reproduction, and 3 of them were for housing birds until they were ready to be released. Now, throughout all this time, there has been a pedigree that is maintained with all wild and captive populations, which shows you which birds are valuable for the genetic structure of the sparrows. It better informs us to make decisions of which sparrows are no longer useful for a captive breeding program, which then gets released to the wild, and which are valuable, which then gets collected and bred with the rest of the population. So here comes what I call the conservation through the implementation of novel conservation tools. These methods were developed by the state, FWC, and they were implemented at one of the native sites in order to increase nest success. We have our little graphic here on the left, and this is how we use predator exclusion fences. They are installed around every nest found upon discovery. If you can see my cursor, this is a predator exclusion fence. It's kind of a wire mesh that goes around the nest. It's about 2 feet high. It is secured at the bottom. Again, if you see my cursor, with foam in order to fill in any gaps that would allow any snakes to infiltrate through and get to the nest. Some areas still use nest cameras. We stopped using that a while back. And these are used in order to document what was depredating on these nests and what we needed to keep out. And then in special occasions, like for me working in a cattle ranch, we also use electric fences, which are installed around the predator fence, and it keeps cattle out because cattle naturally are very curious animals and they do mess with the fence if you let them. And this is how it all looks like when it's all put together. You can barely see the electric fence on the outside. This is the predator fence that goes around the nest. The foam, you can see it rain. There's actually some standing water there. And somewhere in there is a Florida Grasshopper Sparrow nest. So after applying all these methods alone at one of the native sites, we can see that the daily survival probability, this graph on the right, increased after applying these conservation tools. We have in the filled-in square our unfenced nest and our fenced nest on the hollow one, and we can see that daily survival probability greatly increased after applying this conservation tool. So, working. Another thing that was developed by the state and is now applied on sparrow nest is it's called nest lifting, and it's just as it sounds. It's actually cutting around a nest. You see this graphic here. We cut around 5 inches all around the perimeter and physically lift the nest and shove soil underneath to make this nest sit higher than the rest of the ground. It's a very complicated and risky tool, but so far we have not had any nest abandonments due to this lift. We are extremely careful when we do this, and we try to make it look like nothing happened. We always do our best, and we are very grateful that the females have always accepted our manipulation. And we can see that it actually works like a charm, because this picture on the right shows a bunch of standing water, and right in the center we have a very dry, lifted Florida Grasshopper Sparrow nest. So red and porphyry ants, if you're familiar, they are invasive species that come from South America, and somehow they hitched a ride and made it all the way up here. They're widely distributed now, and they are commonly found in areas with high levels of disturbance. And you can imagine an area that has cattle, frequent disturbance by cattle, they are very abundant. So again, it varies, abundance varies by site, but some sites like at the DeLuca Preserve, the predation on nests is very high because they're kind of all over the place. They're not excluded by the predator fences, right? They're really small, so they can get through the holes. So we started employing a hot water treatment that was developed by Dr. Josh King at University of Central Florida. And we treated all over and imported fire ant mounds within a 25 to 30 meter radius of each active nest. And we treated just before they hatched, because during the nestling stage is whenever these nestlings are prone to depredation by fire ants. And this treatment itself greatly increased nest success at sites with a very high red and porphyry ant abundance. And this is what the old setup looks like to our very left. It's basically a water tank, big water container where water runs through a burner and spits boiling hot water within seconds. This is me treating it, and I'm using a way more sophisticated version of this now. It has a very long spout that I stick into the ground and make red imported fire ant stew. And here's a picture of how quickly they can depredate a nest. This is actually a hatch day baby that was quickly depredated by fire ants. So How do these methods impact nest productivity? You can see that we overlaid our daily nest survival probability along with that of the graph I showed you earlier. The shaded circle is daily survival probability after just applying your predator fence. We can see that it didn't really do much for our nest. Then in 2017, we started applying the red imported fire ant treatments, and our daily survival probability went way up. It went almost the same and sometimes even higher than that at the native sites. So we learned that fencing alone in private ranches is not effective, and we must include red imported fire ant treatments. And we also learned that productivity is equivalent, if not higher, than sites and native sites using the same conservation tools. So how did the implementation of these tools influence productivity since we started using it in 2017? Well, we can see that the proportion of eggs hatched versus nestlings fledged increased greatly since we started using this treatment in 2017, and all the other conservation tools applied. Eggs hatched in the blue and nestlings fledged. You can see that this orange bar just went up after we started using these tools. So going back to the ranches, how are they contributing to the conservation of the Florida grasshopper sparrow? Well, there are now 6 monitored populations. 3 are in native dry prairie and 3 are in working cattle ranches. The ranch in the yellow DeLuca Preserve was donated to University of Florida under a conservation easement in 2020. Later, another ranch underneath the blue in this green star, Corrigan Ranch, was acquired for conservation in 2021, and it held at that time the highest population of Florida grasshopper sparrow, even more so than in native sites. We know of 2 other populations where Florida grasshopper sparrows exist, and one is in the process of conservation. Now, the recovery goal for the species is to reach 10 subpopulations with 50 breeding pairs each that are self-sustainable. We know that sparrows in working ranches make up 1/3 of the total wild population, and we also know that all remaining dry prairie and public lands, at least, is already protected. So with all this information, we have concluded that in order to save the species from extinction, cooperation between private and public sectors is the key for the future of the species. And future efforts need to consider non-native private lands in addition to native habitats. And this is in order to create a network of grasslands that includes private and public lands, which creates connectivity and acts as a wildlife corridor that species can inhabit and use for dispersal. So the protection of cattle ranches are creating a lot more habitat that the sparrows can use. So this creates a shift in the conservation paradigm of the species that we know. We now know that these birds do not appear to be as sensitive to habitat as we once believed. And we know that with some work, sparrows nesting on ranches aren't hopeless and they can actually be productive, but they do require nest protection measures for the time being. Ultimately, this population has caused us to further shift our conservation focus, and now we are trying to prioritize figuring out how to manage viable sparrow populations in other ranches. And if we accomplish it, it will be a huge conservation success for the species because it will open up more habitat, which is needed for the recovery goals. So additionally, understanding the habitat selection in private lands is imperative, and that's something that we haven't yet achieved. We hope to be able to understand what is making sparrows successful in working cattle ranches. We hope to understand what habitat characteristics they are selecting for and what they are avoiding, as well as habitat characteristics shared at nesting sites. And I think more importantly, we want to be able to understand what works for a successful cattle operation that is profitable and grassland bird conservation as well. So this is the end of the presentation for the Florida grasshopper sparrow. It seemed like I talked forever, but I left a lot of information out, but I will go ahead and play a little clip from the documentary if we still have time. I'll answer any questions at the end. see. Let's see if YouTube is nice enough to let us see it without ads. Please. Yay.
Fabiola, we don't hear any sound. You
Oh,
need to share your sound as well. When you share the screen, click the sound button.
share settings. I do not know how to do that.
Okay. Well, if you unshare that screen and you go to share, there's a little box that says share audio. If you go to share screen,
Screen, share settings, host tools, share screen.
and there's a box that you can check for video and audio.
Sound. You got it. All right, share.
Let's see if that works.
Put it over. Okay.
No.
And they also had the potential for avian predators. We've got sandhill crane. And losing 90% of habitat is pretty harsh.
Does that
The
work?
fact that they're ground
Yes, we hear it now.
makes them very vulnerable. They've got land predators, they've got snakes, they've got skunks, they've got coyotes. Then they also had the potential for avian predators. We've got sandhill cranes, crows, hawks. These species are so endangered and their populations are so small. Every single nest counts. It was definitely a little bit overwhelming at first. There were doubts, there was moments of nervousness, questioning if I was doing things right. Everything eats them, everything goes wrong.
They're critically endangered for a reason, which means that lots of things go wrong all the time. So it's like some people cannot take like the stress of like things failing all the time.
Yeah, we're like a good halfway. We care so much, but at the same time, we're like, we gotta keep going.
So you hear that? That's their grasshopper bus. That's why they get the name of the grasshopper sparrow. But then when they're paired, they do this warble. That sounds different. That little warble. That's whenever we know that they're paired.
It looks like such an unremarkable place, but the prairie is a very special ecosystem. You start walking on it and you see all these different animals that it sustains, and I can't help but feel connected to it. We are in the process of banding Florida Grasshopper Sparrow nestlings. The purpose of banding every single bird is to keep track of them. We will also take a DNA sample that we'll send off to a lab to do some genetic analysis. Whenever populations become too small, they just start breeding amongst each other, so the same genetics get shared amongst the same population. It can take one disease to wipe out the sparrows So in order to save the species, we need to have more breeding birds in the wild. More birds equals more babies, and we need to do it fast.
My name is Andrew Schumann. I'm a Conservation and Recovery Program Manager here at White Oak Conservation in Yulee, Florida. White Oak was involved with the Florida Grasshopper Sparrow working group back in 2012. There were so few birds out there in the wild, the species continued to decline and was to the point where conservation breeding was a necessity. But it did seem like a lot of weight to know that a species was going extinct, and this was kind of a last-ditch effort to try to save it.
Have a nest of 4 eggs.
Nest of 4 eggs? Okay. The birds start breeding earlier than in the wild, and they also breed for longer. They usually lay a nest of 3 to 5 eggs. 5 eggs are not super common in the wild, but they're very common here at White Oak. And this is probably because they have all the food they need. We provide that. The incubation period's around 11 days. And then 5 days after that nest fledges, they usually start laying another nest. And so while that female's incubating that nest, she's still caring for her previous offspring, which are dependent on her. So when she goes to take a break from incubating and get some food, she's got a lot of hungry mouths waiting for her. Grasshopper sparrows are really well adapted to produce lots and lots of offspring. They're very good at it. The conservation goal is to find a management solution in the wild that will allow the species to reproduce naturally without having man-made help. We're hoping this is a short-term thing here at White Oak.
Great, that is the end of it. And with that, there's a lot of people that have been involved in everything I just talked about. So here's a picture just to show a few of them, show my thanks to a few of them. And I talked about a lot of things. So if you guys have questions that I can answer, feel free to ask away. If not, if nothing of what I just said made sense, go watch that short documentary. It'll probably answer a lot of your questions. It is on YouTube under the Little Brown Bird and Nat Geo's channel. So thank you all so much.
Fabby, when we have questions, thank you. Are you aware that we have breeding grasshopper sparrows right here in Central Texas?
I knew that, yes.
Yeah,
I heard that, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
So
I think I would be more savvy.
To do questions, we have to have people speak into the microphone so that the people online can hear. So does anybody in the room? Okay, I'm going to come back there and.
Hi, Fabiola.
Hi.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for spending the time with us and talking about what you've done. I think what you've done and what you continue to do is just super cool. And my question is, we're all either birders or environmentalists or pro-conservation in general, but unfortunately not everyone is. And I live in an area with a lot of cattle ranches. So I was wondering if you had any advice on how people like me could go to these ranchers and try and make them care about this, even though, they probably never heard or seen these birds before in their life.
I think a really good way to approach a rancher is always to come with proof. And that's one of the things that I really loved about the Dixon Water Foundation and the ranches that they have across Texas is that they showcase what good management does for the land. I think probably approaching them with data in hand, even though I know ranchers are not data type of people, or, encouraging them to attend, workshops. I know that there's lots of workshops around Texas that talk about, cattle grazing and bird friendly type of grazing, and, kind of just show them firsthand how managing for, you don't want to say managing for birds, right? But like adaptive management helps both cattle and birds, because, for example, whenever you do rotational grazing, you're applying pressure to this one specific pasture, and it gets grazed down, and then it has a period of recuperation, and then you move on to the next one. That creates, a mosaic of habitat for all kinds of birds that can exist in those different conditions. But then it also is forage for, for the landowner. I know people that have summer and winter pastures, and that's, a prime example of what a rest period will do to your pasture. So I think a landowner will probably appreciate kind of seeing it firsthand. So if there's a way for you to get to them and get them to, I don't know, go to a place where they can see the effects of adaptive management, that would be a great thing to do.
Thank you so much.
Another question here.
Thank you, Fabby. There was a Texas Wildlife Association webinar with Kelly Harris from the Xerces Society today, and she mentioned this amazing technological revolution in transmitters, and that when they tag the monarchs, they have a very tiny solar panel on them, so that now they're confident that when they tag one, it will last the rest of that butterfly's life. Of course, the butterfly's life may not be nearly as long as a bird's life, so I'm really curious as to what the current technology is that you use, and do they last for the life of each bird?
Well, actually, we have heard about, the butterfly tags, and as of right now, there's not enough technology to have a transmitter that's small enough, because the transmitter, anything that you add on to a bird whenever you're tagging it, cannot be more than 4% of its body weight. So right now we only have VHF, which are very high frequency transmitters, and you track tracking like a radio with an antenna. But we're hoping that soon enough somebody can come up with something sophisticated enough where we don't have to be, retrapping these birds every time to fit them with transmitters. Because what we have right now is a transmitter that only lasts from 30 to 45 days. And that's what we use for the project I did back in Texas. So as of right now, to my knowledge, there isn't anything that lasts a very long time.
Thank you. Other questions in the room? Okay, here.
Can you hear me speaking?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for that amazing talk and the work that you do. My question is about, is there any, you spoke really well about the impact of predators and the fire ants. Are there also impacts by, for instance, interactions between the bears and the grasshoppers on competition for food sources, or specific nesting sites, or with another species of bird?
So as far as the Florida Grasshopper Sparrow, no, because it's probably, aside from the Backman sparrow, it's the only other sparrow that breeds in Florida in grasslands. Now on food, on resource competition in wintering grounds, yes, absolutely. And that's also true for in Florida. Whenever we get our migrants from up north in the winter here in Florida, they are absolutely competition to the birds that already exist here. I cannot cite any scientific paper from the top of my head, but absolutely there's competition.
Okay, thank you. Others in the room with a question? How about on the line? Any questions? Okay,
Is it on? How can a small rancher develop a hot water treatment for ants?
So the hot water treatment is basically a pressure washer that was adapted with a burner. And I believe now you can actually purchase them like that. They used to have to put them together, like the pressure washer, and then add the burner aspect to it. But I believe Northern Tools now makes a pressure washer with hot water. So that's all it is basically. And the reason that we use that and not anything else is because people, of course, are very nervous on applying any sort of insecticide on these red-reported fire ants, especially around the sparrows, because we don't know what effect it's going to have on the arthropod population, and we don't have a negative effect on the populations. So just hot water. And the very old school way of doing that, actually, and how it started was with a turkey fryer. So people were just out there turkey frying with a turkey fryer, boiling water, and then pouring it on red-reported fire ant mounds. So when in doubt.
All right, Kip says, I miss working with them on Avon Park Air Force Base. Can you tell us more about how you interact with landowners to get them involved in conservation? How do you build trust with the landowners?
That trust part is really hard because I feel that up until relatively recently, or maybe it's still the case, landowners don't, and conservationists didn't really get along well together. But I think right now in Florida, there's this transition that it's happening that I absolutely love, where ranchers and conservationists are coming together. And I think the reason that happened is because we all have one goal in common, which is protecting wild Florida and old Florida, as they call it. And that happens after having so much inflow from people moving into Florida. It's estimated actually that about 1,000 people move to Florida every single day. So development is moving extremely fast. And I think whenever you approach them under the lens of, you know what, let's keep this area wild for forever. I think we share the same interest on protecting wild spaces, and I think that's a really good approach to talk to landowners.
Thank you very much, Fabby. This is wonderful, and it shows that I've watched the whole movie. You need to go home and watch this whole movie because this woman is the picture of persistence. I mean, things happen, and she just keeps going. And that's what it takes. And from 100 birds, now there's 1,000, I think, or is that the latest?
1,000 birds have been released so far, more than that now. But as far as birds being established, there is just under 200 birds in the wild now, which is a big accomplishment because I think as early as 2018, there was less than 50 males in the wild. So that captive breeding program has definitely made a difference.
That is so impressive. And just as a note for Audubon, they have land managers that are out working with the landowners, and some of them in the same area. The Mims Ranch is the one that we went on. And the Dixon Water people also teach these seminars to get the landowners to see it's to their advantage. Because that old saying that your grandfather or your father or about what's good for the bird is good for the herd, it's coming through when they see that data, they see the birds thriving, the cattle are doing, they're not having to do as much work. And we were out there when they were doing the rotational grazing. Cows are not stupid. If there's more grass over there than there is over there, all you got to do is open the door and there they go. Duh. And it's just more like the bison, and it's trying to mimic that kind of thing. But I think what it really shows is with a good plan, people that have the persistence to execute those plans, we can get this going and we can make it happen. And I salute all the people that do these things in Florida, in Texas, and all over North America. So if you hear of ranches that are doing it, give them an attaboy, attagirl, whatever, and buy grass-fed beef, Audubon beef that is raised on these ranches too, that are managing for birds and the cattle, of course. So thank you, Fabby, for spending your evening with us. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I hope you guys go and watch the film. And if it didn't come through, when you watch the film, just know that all that effort has been a multi-agency collaboration for a very long time. So there's lots of people involved. And I'm just one single person that was singled out to, be the face of that film. But there's so many hardworking people involved.
Wish we could clone you all. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody that came tonight. And if you have want to read any more about this, the Audubon websites and magazines have information on these things. And we can put you in touch with the range manager if you know people who want to get involved in this program. So thanks a lot. And if you will put your, okay, yeah. Okay.
I'm in the Quail Masters program in the Research Institute, and so we go throughout Texas. And 2 weeks ago, we were in Hebronville visiting 2 ranches. This blew my mind. These are hunters and conservationists. The one ranch we visited was 383,000 acres. It was the Jones Ranch. You do the math, it's 593 square miles. Their #1 goal is quail management. That's all they do. They average 1.2 birds per acre, which is over 400,000 bobwhite quail. Their goal is to burn 10,000 acres annually.
Wow.
So there's a lot of good people out there, and it butts up to the eastern boundary of the East Foundation Ranch, which is actually smaller. So thank you for what you do. And these ranchers are doing.
Thank you. Bye. Okay. So we'll sign off from now and and we'll be in touch, Fabby. If you ever want to come to Texas and visit, is your family still in the area?
Yes, they're actually in Presidio, Texas, and my husband family lives in San Antonio, so I'll probably be there not before long.
Well, come see us. We'll be happy to put you up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Night night. Okay, so if you guys will help us out by